Well, that did not go the way we wanted it to. Kansas State falling to Arizona State in a must-win weekend game. Let's talk about it.
You are Locked On Kansas State, your daily podcast on the Kansas State Wildcats, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. I'm your host, Christian Rauh, and thank you so much for making Locked On Kansas State your first listen every single day. Welcome back to my everydayers. Happy Saturday. I wish it was a happier Saturday. Unfortunately, that is not the case when it comes to the Kansas State men's basketball team. Them falling 66-54 to Arizona State, helping the Sun Devils break a 6-game losing streak and give them only their 4th win in Big 12 play. This was a really rough loss from start to finish from Kansas State. We're going to really break this one down and chat a lot about it right here on Locked On Kansas State. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. So check out FanDuel.com for more of that. This is just it's a downer of a game that happened on Saturday and today, because this was one of those moments where after the West Coast trip with BYU and Utah, you knew that this win right here had to not only be a statement win, but at least had to be a W in the win column. Had to, at some way, somehow, and that just never panned through from start to finish against Arizona State. There was only one lead in this entire game for Kansas State, and that happened when the score was 4-2 in the first couple minutes of the game, and Kansas State just couldn't get this one together, and what an unfortunate way to go. Obviously, the biggest issue that happened with Kansas State in this one is there was no Coleman Hawkins. Coleman Hawkins was ruled out just about an hour before game time, hour before tip-off. At least that's the first time I heard it across social media. He had a knee bone bruise that he suffered against Utah. We kind of all saw that he was dealing with something in that Utah game. Didn't know it was going to be that serious to where we are going to lose him for this game against Arizona State. That obviously was a huge blow for this offense. And as much as we see Coleman Hawkins kind of have his struggles over the last couple games, it was clear that missing him was a huge thing on the court. And it might not have been because of the points, although scoring was an issue for Kansas State in this one. But he leads the team in assists. He leads the team in steals, leads the team in blocks. And they just looked lost out there without a guy like Coleman Hawkins. Now, we don't even know if he's going to be back for the next game on Wednesday against UCF. We'll hear more about that with Jerome Tang in the presser, I'm sure, later on. I wasn't going to wait around for the presser. I wanted to speak with you guys. We'll talk about that later on during the week as we ramp up to the UCF game here on Locked On Kansas State. But Arizona State also was dealing with some issues. BJ Freeman was also reported that he's no longer with the Sun Devils. He has multiple ejections over the last couple of games. The conduct detrimental to the team is what Coach Hurley said, and he is no longer with the squad. That was their leading scorer going into this one. And they only played 7 players, and Arizona State looked like a refreshed team in Manhattan. That should have been the other way around. It should have been Kansas State feeling refreshed, regardless of how the status of Coleman Hawkins was after the 2 losses on the West Coast. They looked lost. They looked like they didn't have the fight that they needed. And now we're looking at really the only chance of making the NCAA tournament is if they win the entire Big 12 tournament in Kansas City. Like, that's probably the only chance you got now. There's maybe one more opportunity, but I'm not going to go in that far. To be honest with you, I think I'm done talking about their chances for March Madness after losing this game against Arizona State. I talked about on Friday with Joe Tillery how I said I think they have to win the next 4. They couldn't even win the first one. So I think I'm going to move on from that one. You're starting off with this one down 9-6 in the first 4 minutes. I was hoping for a little bit more of a surge from the team. Obviously, the Coleman Hawkins thing was huge. I really liked what I saw from CJ Jones early. I think CJ Jones probably played the absolute best out of any Kansas State Wildcat in this one. He stepped up in the absence of Coleman Hawkins. But being down 9-6 in the first 4, not a terrible thing. We all know that the first 4 minutes has been a huge struggle for this squad all season long. They wound up being down 12-6 after that first TV timeout. And then it kind of started to get downhill. We started to see a little bit of issues, especially on the defensive side. This is where I think the confusion came in. I don't know if it was a communication issue with the defense, whatever the case was, but there were multiple open threes from Arizona State that maybe not all of them fell, but you could tell that there was something missing, something not going right with Kansas State's defense. And that just changed the entire feel to this game, allowing multiple three-pointers open. You were always seemed like the defense was always running around and not being able to guard their man. It was just a really tough go for this Wildcats team from start to finish. I mean, really, it just felt like one of those track meets where you're always behind, where you weren't even close to the podium. You were just so far behind, starting off on the other side of the loop before you had an opportunity to get into this one. It is really coming down. I hear the rain outside of my house. So if you hear rain on the speakers, apologize for that, but it is really coming down outside right now. 10 first half turnovers for Kansas State. That was huge. That was not a good thing as well. A lot of things going down with that. And then, of course, you wanted to get guys like Doug McDaniel, David Gasson, and Brennan Hawson going early because of the absence of Coleman Hawkins, and you really couldn't do that. Now, David Gasson finished off with some really good numbers. He wound up stepping up in the second half. That's great. Doug McDaniel didn't get his game going the entire time. I'll talk about more of that in just a minute. But the biggest thing to me, was Arizona State did a really good job, to be quite frankly, a fine job at jamming and shutting down Brennan Hawson and not letting him get those shots that he gets in those corners, or he gets those open threes, even if they are 5 or 6 feet behind the three-point line. They didn't give him a single opportunity to do so. Now, I think that kind of goes back to the Utah game where we saw guys like Gabe Matson, who was trying to tail and be so close on Brennan Hawson so much that he was fouling so much in the second half. He had 4 fouls in the second half, and most of them being just on trying to guard Brennan Hawson, running around and trying to stop him. I think Hurley and his Arizona squad took that tape and had a really good game plan, and it worked. They shut him down. I think he only finished with just a couple 3-pointers. Yeah, he was 2 for 7 from the field, 2 for 7 from behind the line, and only finished with 6 points. And that's just not going to cut it when you are missing arguably your best player in Coleman Hawkins. You can always make that. There's an argument that there's probably 3 players you can have that argument for, maybe even 4. But if you're missing one of them, and Doug McDaniel doesn't step up, he was 2 for 12, only had 4 points. He had 7 assists, which is great. You needed that with the absence of Hawkins, but had 4 turnovers. David Gasson really stepped up, especially in the second half, 20 points. He had 13 rebounds, nice double-double from him. But if you can't get it from a guy like Brennan Hawson, especially when you continue to go back to it over and over again, trying to get to that 3-pointer, trying to come back from behind, you finish less than 20% as a team behind the 3-point line, 5 for 26. You know, and really be honest, Arizona State didn't even shoot that great. They didn't even shoot that good overall. Heading into the first half, they were tied with field goal percentage. They both had a 40% field goal percentage heading into the first half, but they were down by 6 because it depended on where they were shooting from. You know, Kansas State was only 2 for 10 from the 3-point line. Arizona State was 6 for 18. That was really the only difference in that first half, was that the Sun Devils 3-pointers were falling. It wasn't happening for Kansas State. The second half was a completely different story. And then obviously the turnovers, especially by Doug McDaniel, those 10 turnovers in the first half, just wasn't very great. I see we got some comments coming in. We'll get them in just a second. You know, last thing about the first half stats, and we'll talk about the rest of the game in just a minute. Now, I was really excited to see that at least, and I hate that this is the only time that we're finally seeing it because you have to utilize some of your other bench players when Coleman Hawkins is out. But this team won the rebounding battle for probably the first time since maybe a non-conference game. I don't know the last time they've won the rebounding battle in a game when it was all said and done. They wound up getting the first half, being up 23-15, and they wound up winning the rebound battle by 10, 43-33, when this was all said and done. But that didn't matter. They didn't win the point battle, and they lose this one by 12 points, 66-54. We're going to get to those comments in just a minute. We got more to talk about with this game. And what is the next step forward for this one? Like, where is the hope? Where is your thought process? We got a lot to discuss right here on Locked On Kansas State. Well, March basketball is here. It's very close, unfortunately, and there's no better way to get in on the action with Prize Picks, the best place for your daily fantasy sports. With Prize Picks, you pick more or less on at least 2-player projections, and if you're right, you can win up to 1,000 times your cash. It's fast and easy and keeps every game exciting. We're not going to really talk about the college basketball side right here. We'll talk NBA. I like to build on the NBA, and I'm looking about maybe Jason Tatum for more than, let's say, 28, 29 points, and Anthony Davis with his new squad for more than 12 rebounds. That's where I'm thinking for my Prize Picks this week. I also really like on Tuesdays. This is when I play. I play on Tuesdays because they have these Taco Tuesday deals. Prize Picks even offers weekly promotions, like I mentioned, where you can get discounted player projections of even more value. That's my favorite time to play on Prize Picks. So download the app and use the code LOCKEDONCollege, all one word, to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONCollege for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, run your game. And welcome on back to Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats podcast. Hey, for your second listen of the day, check out Locked On College Basketball. They have you hooked for the entire league. And if you want to get an idea of where maybe this team sits, are they still in consideration? I doubt it. I highly doubt it. But if you want to get an idea of what the bubble looks like, they have you covered over there on Locked On College Basketball. Check that out for your second listen of the day. Got a couple comments coming in here. Robbie Schlitz says, we have the Bats Cats to cheer for now. Talking about the baseball team. You're right. The baseball team just had a nice ranked win over the weekend. And they're an interesting team right now. They're a really interesting team. We're going to definitely talk about some baseball here very soon because there's some fun stuff to talk about. And of course, the women's team is really fun to discuss right now as well. And we're still going to talk men's basketball. We're not going anywhere, but definitely the narrative is going to change for this team because after that really great winning streak they had, those ranked wins and those quad one wins, there's a really strong chance that they're going to be maybe possibly, even if they win against Iowa State at the end of the season, there's a possible chance that they could be a team that has 4 quad 1A wins, if you will, and still miss the tournament. That would be the first time in NCAA history. But because of these losses to BYU, to Utah, and now Arizona State, there's a true chance that could happen. And that's an unfortunate thing to be in the history books about or to hold that type of record. But there's a really strong chance that can happen. Now, for the record, I don't think that we have even a shot at beating Iowa State at the end of the season if we play remotely close to what we played in this one against Arizona State. Who knows what's the status of Coleman Hawkins moving into the rest of the week? You got to expect that if he does play against UCF on Wednesday, he will not be 100%. A bone bruise in your knee, that doesn't sound fun. I can't say that I've ever have dealt with that. Now, I've dealt with knee and back injuries and shoulder injuries before. I've never had the bone bruise. I've had some football knee injuries in the past, but that one doesn't sound fun. And obviously having to make a lot of movements on a basketball court, that's just not the way, obviously just not a great way to happen. So in my mind, if your only shot left is to win the Big 12 championship to make it to the NCAA tournament, if that is even still the goal for this squad, right? Unless they themselves have an internal conversation and change the goal themselves. Who knows what the case may be now that you've lost 3 in a row. But if your goal is to still make the tournament, because there is still a slight chance, then you don't rush Coleman Hawkins back. You make sure he's ready for the Big 12 tournament and you put all your eggs in that basket. That might not sound like the greatest thing right now, as we still have a month and 2.5 weeks until that tournament. But you have to think that if you are trying to make that one last push, that is your only shot, then at least maybe sit him out for one more game and make sure that he is prepared for that next time around. This was a really tough game to watch from the entire time. And I will say this, after that 6-game winning streak, I have found myself in a way better calming manner, if you will, watching Kansas State basketball when they're down. I don't flood to social media, by the way, if you look on the channel here, you'll also notice that Locked On Kansas State is now on Twitter. You can find it at Locked On K State. So go ahead and hit that follow, drop in some knowledge and all the good stuff. Talk about the Wildcats over there. But I don't rush the social media anymore and talk about the woes and how terrible this team might look in the first 4 minutes or how whatever the case may be. I don't. I maybe put out a tweet at halftime, kind of give my feelers out, and then I wait for this post game. And the reason behind it is because we have had comeback. We've come back from multiple games this year. There's been multiple times where we started out slow, we've turned it around. Tang has made some strategic timeouts. They figured it out. It just wasn't the case today. And the cards just weren't in their favor from the get-go. Obviously, losing Coleman Hawkins was huge. I wonder if they knew that they were going to be without Coleman Hawkins more than just the hour that before they reported it. So if that was the case, maybe the game plan changed. I'm not sure. But regardless of the case, you can't win in any type of game with Coleman Hawkins or not when you're shooting overall 33% from the field and less than 20% from the three-point line. You hardly got to the free-throw line as well. You hardly got there. You didn't get to the charity strike until 12 minutes left in the game. 12 minutes left. And David Gasson finally got to the charity strike. I even have the number exactly. 12 minutes and 26 seconds left. In the second half was the first time that David Gasson got the Kansas State Wildcats to the free-throw line. Now, you can talk about maybe that the Big 12 refs weren't doing a great job. That's been a huge conversation all year. We saw it last night in the BYU game as well. But regardless of the case, Kansas State lost this game. There's no other excuse. You can't give it to anybody. You can't point any other fingers other than saying Kansas State did not get the job done, did not get that statement win that they needed, and now see themselves probably outside of any consideration at an at-large bid for March Madness. Again, Big 12 tournament champions are bust now. And that's a tough thing to do when you have teams like Houston, in Iowa State, in Arizona, in BYU, and even Kansas. It's a really tough thing to do if you want to make that happen. This is actually the first win for Arizona State in Manhattan. You know how long? I heard on the broadcast when I was about to X out of it. Since December of 1973. That's right. That is the first time in over 50 years that Arizona State has won in Manhattan. Just terrible. Just terrible. And, the second half didn't start off great for Kansas State either. They started off with a 7-0 run against Arizona State. Just a rough go for this team overall. Shooting was bad. Doug McDaniel didn't step up the way he needed to. And I think, Jeff Burkhart was going to join me on this one. He was having some internet issues, and he'll be back for the next post-game show. But I was messaging him, during the game. And obviously right before the game, I sent a message to him talking to him about Coleman Hawkins. And I told him, I said, the best case scenario is that somebody else steps up, with the exception of Doug McDaniel and David Gasson. Somebody else steps up. And at first, I thought that was going to be C.J. Jones. I thought that was going to be enough. And it would have been if the other players like Doug McDaniel, like David Gasson, which we finally found towards the second half, and Brennan Hawson did their normal routine. But they took a step backwards without Coleman Hawkins on the court. That might have been the worst play since non-conference play. That was probably the worst game in the Big 12 for Kansas State this year. Would you agree? Do you think that was the worst game so far for Kansas State in Big 12 play? I mean, there's a couple other candidates, but I think that one might have done it. And I know you can put the little asterisks of saying that Coleman Hawkins wasn't there, but you got to win the games. You got to find a way to win the games with the players you have available to you. So I'm going to right now, without taking a further look and just from the spot right now that I'm at right here, I'm going to say that's the worst game that we've saw so far this season in Big 12 play from the Kansas State Wildcats. Just a tough one. Just a tough one for Kansas State. I see a couple more comments coming in. We'll get to that in just a minute because we got to now move direction to what's next and where do we go from here? Just so many questions for this squad. And it's frustrating. It is very frustrating to where we sit right now after that huge winning streak and now 3 losses in a row, and especially the 2 teams we shouldn't have lost to, I'll give you the BYU win. I'll give that one to you. Provo's a tough place. But Utah and now Arizona State, it's a frustrating run. We'll be right back after this. Well, when the games tip off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in than with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even you don't miss the action from opening tip-off, or if you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I personally love FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps me in the moment, everything exciting. I like to watch multiple games at a time. That live feature to me is super fun. So whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3, I'd never feel like anything to miss my chance. Plus, the app is so easy to use. I think it's one of the best interfaces in all sports bettings. And when you win, you get paid instantly. Nothing bad about that. So right now, new FanDuel customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment count with FanDuel, the official partner of the NBA. And welcome back to Locked On Kansas State, your daily Kansas State Wildcats. I already see a comment in here. I'm going to answer it, but I feel like this one's already done and over with. Do you think they're trying to redshirt Buddy, or there's something that he may stay? I don't think Buddy Rich is going to be a Kansas State Wildcat next season. I think that he is going to enter the transfer portal. I think whatever happened outside of it, whatever the case may be, thank you for your question, by the way. I appreciate you chiming in. But whatever the case may be that happened and that changed him from being in the game where he had that great game to not even getting a single minute, must be an off-court thing. Jerome Tang won't even answer it in the press conferences. It is something that's off the court, and I don't think that he will be back with the team. I'm guessing that he will be entering the portal. He might even be entering on the first day, my guess. But if they find a way to do it, that'd be great. That'd be great, because we need all the help we can get next year. And that's where I want to lead into right now. Where do you go from here? You've lost 3 games in a row. You've put yourself out of consideration of an at-large bid. I feel like even if you won out, if you won the rest of these games, I think Lenardi and bracketology will probably put them back in close to the bubble because of that Iowa State win. I think that's the only reason that there's maybe even still a pulse. If you could win out, including the final against the Cyclones, that's just, to me, it just seems like so far-fetched after what we just saw over the past couple games, especially against the Utes and the Sun Devils right here. But moving forward, you have guys like Coleman Hawkins. Obviously, you got those guys that are going to be moving on. We got to see some nice play from David Castillo in the second half. He had some really nice three-pointers. I was hoping that first three-pointer that David Castillo made was going to change the momentum, maybe be that dagger that we could talk about heading on to this post-game show, saying it all changed when David Castillo hit that three-point shot. But then immediately right after, Arizona State drained one and just sucked the air right out of Bramlage. Sucked it right back out. With the exception of the breadsticks at the end of the game, I think those fans had a really tough time. It was a tough game for them to watch. It was a really tough one. But they found a way to get some breadsticks. I guess there's a win there for them. Overall, though, looking forward, I think I'm going to slowly get myself back into the point where I was before that winning streak, where I kind of want to see more of the younger guys play a little more, because I think we're at the point to where we need to start looking towards the future yet again. And I hate to be in that spot, because I hated where I was in January when we were discussing that, because it already felt like you quit on the season. But I don't think there's a turn right now. Again, with the exception of winning the rest of your regular season games, including Iowa State, there is no room for error now. That might be enough. And then obviously you got to do some damage still in Kansas City. But the only way that you can make sure you're in is by winning the whole dang thing in the Big 12 Conference Championship. And the way they're playing right now, I don't even know if they get a single win, regardless of who they play. They're not playing great basketball. at the moment. I'd like to see David Castillo get a little bit more minutes. We got to see him play a little more now. That was because of obviously Hawkins being out. CJ Jones stepped up and played some really good minutes. And I think he's a great guard as well. But we saw 16 minutes from David Castillo. The last couple of games before that, we only saw him at 4, 8. I don't think we've seen double digits for quite some time. And we got 16 out of him against Arizona State tonight. He had 6 points. He was 2 for 6. Both of them were from behind the 3-point line. 2 rebounds as well, did have an assist and did have a steal. That's not bad numbers. I thought his defense was really good too. I thought he was very aggressive defensively for what he did during his minutes. I'd like to see a little bit more of David Castillo again. And that doesn't change my thoughts on Doug McDaniel, because Doug McDaniel, I think, is still the point guard of the future. He didn't have a great game this time around. But who knows what the game plan was heading into this one. It could have been centered around Coleman Hawkins, and they got bad news right before the game. We're going to see what Jerome Tang says in the post game. We're going to talk about it later on this show. Thank you so much for listening in to Locked On Kansas State. We'll be back here tomorrow with some more college football talk. We got women's basketball to talk about. What's going on with Yoka Lee? We got plenty there. We got baseball to talk about, as you mentioned in the comments. We have so much stuff going on right here on this show, and we're not going away anytime soon. We're probably going to be dropping multiple episodes a day this week. So be sure to tune in. If you haven't subscribed, make sure you click that subscribe button below. Join the conversation. Love always chatting with you throughout the week. And if you're looking for more, again, you can find me now on Twitter at LockedOnKState. Always fun chatting with you there. Until then, please like the video. Please subscribe. And this has been Locked On Kansas State.